welcome today to an India Today special where the countdown has begun for US President Donald Trump's visit to India, the first such standalone visit by an American president. He will be accorded a grand welcome in Ahmedabad by Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday. But the big questions that are being asked, is this visit about expectations? What are the possibilities? We will take all the issues one by one, analyze them threadbare in this special roundtable that we have. I'm joined today by Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States of America, by Raj Chengappa, India Today's editorial director. I'm joined by Geeta Mohan, our foreign affairs editor, and by KC Singh, former secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. We'll also be joined by special voices from Washington. Fatima Salman, Assistant Director, South Asia Center, Atlantic Council, is joining us. Dave Clark, White House editor of the Washington Post, is also with us. We'll also be joined later by Richard Rosso, Senior Advisor at the Wadhwani Chair in US-India Policy Studies. Thank you all very much for joining us. I'm going to turn to my first question. The Trump visit, is it hype or is it substance? Let's take that to you, Mr. Chengappa. All this hype over the lakhs who are going to meet Mr. Trump in Ahmedabad. We are now told the figure has been scaled down finally from 7 million. But let's be very clear. Is this a hype or is there substance to this visit?
Well, it's optics. I wouldn't call it hype. There's plenty of optics and there's substance too. And the way I look at it, there's a lot of win-win for both the sides. For President Trump coming down here with his A-team, that itself is of tremendous significance. When I say A-team, it means his wife, his daughter and his son-in-law, apart from the top officials that are coming. That's unusual. You said it's a standalone visit. He hasn't done this. He hates flying. He doesn't like to travel too much. And yet he's coming without what was seen to be the big issue, the trade deal. Now, I think the most important thing from the Indian side is the way they've handled Mr. Trump right through these 3.5 years that has been there, particularly Mr. Modi, played to his vanity in some senses, stood firm when it came to Indian interests on these things. And the fact that they could, and you know, we wanted the entire thing to be focused on the strategic side, which is defense, counterterrorism and other things. And trade was an important part, but you know, that was hijacking the entire agenda. So
We'll come to trade in a moment.
We are bringing it right back to where we wanted, a broad spectrum of issues, a broad spectrum of strengths.
We will come back to trade in a moment, but Meera Shankar, is there a lot of hype associated with the visit? You know, the entire, or let's use the word optics. You know, it's all about, you know, the atmospherics more than the nitty-gritty of diplomacy. That's how critics position it. Is that a valid criticism?
Well, you know, given the role of the media today and the importance that it has, I think visual images of any visit, in fact, sometimes capture the essence of the visit more than even the substance for the leaders, particularly today. But I think given the nature of the India-US relationship, where you have increasingly convergent strategic interests, where you have, especially for India, your largest export market and the synergies between your IT companies and your tech companies, and where you have a vibrant people-to-people relationship, I think it will be a combination of both. In some sense, we are playing to Mr. Trump's personality in terms of giving it high visibility optics or packaging, but I think there will be some substance because there is a fairly solid foundation. It's not a relationship which is just up in the air.
I'll come to the left side of my table in a moment, but I just want to go for a moment to Washington because Dave Clark of the Washington Post is standing by. He's the White House editor. Dave, what's your sense? You know, interestingly, some of my earlier panelists suggested that we are playing to Mr. Trump's vanity, or that this is what Mr. Trump wants, a high visibility visit. Is that how it's being seen in America, as a high visibility visit where the optics will matter, particularly as we enter a big presidential election year?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of what President Trump wants out of his foreign trips is he wants to be feted to a certain extent. You know, we've seen other countries do this where they have big parades that he's invited to. A big to-do is made about him when the agenda itself does not contain a lot of substance. And I think we're seeing that here. There's going to be the big rally at the cricket stadium. Chances are President Trump is going to love that. As far as the nitty-gritty of the policy agenda you were talking about, maybe there'll be some progress on the trade talks. There may be some talk about defense. But overall, it's a way of sort of showing that U.S.-India relations are good and growing stronger. So I think Prime Minister Modi, he wants to make a big show for President Trump because he knows that's what he likes and that's how you get in his good graces and can, for good or bad, if it's a good or bad method, but that's how President Trump does business, and it could help Prime Minister Modi going forward.
The word now being used is show. There are two showmen out there. The chemistry between two showmen. Mr. Prime Minister Modi, who likes to, the glitzy events. We saw it with Howdy Modi in Houston. And this is India's way of reciprocating. You agree with that, Casey Singh, that with certain leaders, the optics really do matter? And Mr. President Trump is one such leader. He wants the extravaganza.
Look, firstly, there's nothing wrong in playing to his vanity. The question is, don't demean yourself while you do it. We are not doing that. We're just receiving him. And this is a very old style of diplomacy. There's nothing new in this. I remember as a child standing by the roadside when Zhou Enlai came, the Chinese prime minister. He would go through the streets. Then Bulgarian Khrushchev came. It used to be the done thing. Prime Minister Nehru standing with them in an open car. Those were the days.
When Jackie Kennedy came, she sort of wowed audiences in this country.
Queen Elizabeth, when she came the first time. In fact, there's a joke. She went to Jaipur and she's riding with the king there, then Maharaja. And somebody in the crowd saying, has he got a foreign wife? Because they hadn't seen Maharaja Jaipur sitting with a foreign woman. So, this used to be done because security was not a concern. It was a very big thing. People will turn out and there was no television.
Right.
But in the age of security and television, you restrict it. But Mr. Trump loves it, so that's why the stadium is there. They'll be able to do the parade. But the question is, what is it that they need it for? Trump rarely, I don't think any other US president has come to India in an election year when he is facing elections. So very clearly, there's an electoral message. He sent it in from Houston.
What is the electoral message?
You have 4 million persons of Indian origin. The swing states become important. Texas, 200,000 Indians. You must swing a few votes. And the second thing is he's coming from an impeachment. Although it didn't succeed because the Republicans have a majority in the Senate. But the Congress did impeach him, did indict him and send the impeachment to the Senate. Now here he is applauding, lauding, laudatory crowds. So you're sending images back to America. He's very popular. He's a global leader. And a message to the Indian voter, a voter of Indian origin in US. But concomitantly, there's a message here. Because you got Mr. Modi with him. There's no CAA, no mention of Kashmir, no mention of the value system. So US Congress may raise it. Congressmen here may raise it. But if Trump doesn't raise it, the Prime Minister's a winner.
I'll come to that, whether this is seen as some kind of a political win-win in that sense for Mr. Modi. But Geeta, tracking the Ministry of External Affairs, how much importance are they giving, in a sense, to these optics? The Ahmedabad leg, the fact that, the Prime Minister is taking Trump to his home state, then now the visit, the ceremonial visit in a way to Agra, where he'll be probably with a selfie in front of the Taj. How much importance are they giving to day one, which is the Monday, which is largely the optics?
Well, a lot of importance, Rajdeep, because it is important for Donald Trump. It is important for the US president to make him feel that he was welcomed in a grand manner. Remember, the 3 statements he made in 3 of his campaign rallies. In all those statements, he said that, well, I'll be very disappointed to see crowds less than 1 lakh or 1 million, so to say, because here there are only 50,000 is a big number. So they're trying
We've got to tell him that Ahmedabad doesn't necessarily have 7 million people, but that apart. Go ahead.
Yeah. And the Indian administration is not just looking at the first leg, but also a little worried about the unpredictability of President Trump. So there was an entire conversation about what can happen, and they're prepared for all the things that President Trump may or may not say.
Dave Clark, you were the one who mentioned that that the optics do matter to President Trump. What is President Trump really seeking out of this visit? The fact that this is in a presidential year, is he really looking at that Indian American vote out there? Is it seen as critical in some of those swing states?
I think it is. I agree with what someone just said a few minutes ago, which is that it really has 2 benefits for him potentially with regard to U.S. domestic politics. One, he does get to see, or at least potentially portray himself as a statesman on the world stage following his impeachment. that can be good optics for him. And it also, it does have a chance for him to woo, Indian American voters. And one of the things about the Trump campaign is they understand that their base is traditionally going to be white men, but they're really trying to appeal to a range of different groups, hoping if they can get just a little bit more support from there, that it could be decisive in swing states. And this trip here could play a role there with regard to the Indian American voters, whether it's Texas or a number of other states that could be close.
Fatima Salman, do you see this visit, therefore, in any way in the context of the US presidential elections? The reason why Mr. Trump has chosen to come here? Or do you see it in the backdrop of the fact that, he's just survived an impeachment and therefore wants this kind of grand welcome in a country like India? Where do you see this visit in the context of where Trump stands today in a presidential year?
Yes, I think I agree with my colleague at the Washington Post. I think that this has a lot to do with the big diaspora community that exists in the United States, the Indian American diaspora community. I think they're not only a big voter base that Trump is looking to in this election year, but they're also a big donor community that I think the Republican Party is looking towards. And I think geostrategically also this trip is really important. It sends a message to the region and to China to show that, the United States and India are partners, and the United States and India is important to the United States for a counterweight against China.
Okay, since we've settled it that Mr. Trump likes the hype, likes the optics, let's move on to the next question. Is trade the new axis of Indo-US ties? What is it that is holding up the trade relationship between the two countries? The US president has made it clear, Raj Chengappa, even before he comes to India, there's going to be no mega trade deal. Now that has diminished expectations in a sense in this country. Is the president in a sense bargaining hard? Or do you believe at the end of the day we will get some kind of a trade deal?
From information that I've collected, it looked like the Indians had met all the requirements. It was the Americans that at the end of this entire intense negotiation said, look, let's take a breather. We want a bigger deal. Let's make it more ambitious. So all the current irritants that were there in the trade arrangements, India had actually met it. So it is not like India was walking away or being recalcitrant about it. The other point, Rajdeep, is to notice that there is apart from the regular trade items, as we call it, goods and services, the defense and energy sector has seen major investments being made by India, particularly buying helicopters. I've seen, there's going to be a big deal that is going to be signed while he's there, $2.6 billion for a Seahawk, apart from Apache helicopters. And let's not also forget that in terms of energy, in the last 2 years, we've already sort of imported $7 billion worth of oil. Now, this in some sense is making us de-risking the Gulf. We are highly dependent on the Gulf. America is suddenly the new partner for energy. So what we are saying is, look, trade and goods and services, we've actually brought down the deficit. America is pushing us for what reason? We have a trade deficit with them, which is advantageous to India. We are saying we've brought that down, which is what America is putting pressure. But look, don't do the kind of pressure you put on China, because that's $400 billion. That's 10 times more. And apart from that, let's not forget that we are giving you, in terms of defense purchases, that's gone to, if you count this particular deal that is going to go through, $21 billion in 10 years. That's enormous. They're becoming one of our largest defense traders.
The flip side, the other way to look at it, Meera Shankar, would be that, Trump's business with India is business. He's a businessman, he's looking for more business. The US wants more business with India and then possibly use India as a counterweight to China and Beijing. Is that how you see it in terms of the fact that the trade deal is stuck? Leads some to believe that we're not getting as much value for our buck as we should.
I think one important aspect is that both sides have sought to minimize the impact of the absence of closure on the trade deal. Now that says something, because from President Trump's side, we could have expected actually that he tries to make it a make or break issue, but that hasn't happened. So at some level, if you see, both sides have tried to discount the make or break nature of a trade deal, saying that we will remain engaged and we'll take it up later. Now, there are real issues and very difficult issues on trade. I mean, one is the issue of market access, which I think to some extent had been resolved, you know, with give and take, little give and take on both sides. But I think there are larger questions of data localization, where we have concerns about security and privacy of data. There are issues of e-commerce and taxation on e-commerce companies, changes in policy. I think these are the larger questions which perhaps the US wants to put on the table and which are going to take much longer to resolve because it involves not only India but areas like Europe, which have adopted similar policies. So I think the thing to also remember is that the trade and economic relationship on the ground is growing despite the difficulties. And I think for both sides, given that President Trump has an America First policy and Prime Minister Modi has a Make in India policy, I think actually clinching a deal is going to take some
But that's
effort.
precisely it. You know, you've got two leaders who are looking at the issue of trade entirely from their domestic constituencies. You've got a prime minister who talks of Make in India. You've got a US president who talks about America First. To that extent, you know, you may say it's not a make or break, but it prevents the relationship from really becoming a full-blown relationship in the absence of a trade deal.
Yeah, I think there are multiple, we're on shifting grounds here because you got RCEP, which we haven't joined. Yeah. You got now coronavirus. We don't know the impact on global trade because last time SARS was there, China only had 5% of global trade. Today it has 15%. How do those supply chains affect? We haven't had a free trade agreement with Europe. So, you know, we are falling between two stools. At the same time, you're absolutely right. Both of them are protectionists. They want to protect their market. But the problem with Trump is that he sees trade as zero sum with each country, which is not the case because our deficit has fallen to about 25 billion. It's 1/12 of the deficit that they have with China. So we are not in the same group as China. And in the services, the deficit is just $5 billion. It's not even that. So what you have to do is, there is the old trade, where just in February, just before coming here, he has signed you on as a developed country, which is, of course, a definition to say if your share of global trade is more than 0.5%, ours is 2.5, then you are a developed country. That means almost $240 million worth of goods on which we are getting preferential entry, you would not be getting. So which means he had made up his mind, trade, let me put on the back burner, let me do what I have to do, because let me go and get the adulation, get re-elected, then we look at this.
But in a sense, Richard Russo, out there in America, is trade with India seen as a priority issue or not? Or is America looking at it purely from an American perspective? You want greater access to our markets, you want you want to cut on import duties, you want market access for farm and manufacturing products. It is seen in a sense as does America see India as being overly protectionist in any form?
Yeah, I think, you have to go back to when Prime Minister Modi came to office 6 years ago. One of the first major steps the government took on trade was walking back from the trade facilitation agreement under the WTO and held that up for a few months. You've seen successive budgets. I mean, I think even when these trade talks were underway, February 1st, India releases its new budget for the fiscal year. And what happens? More than 60 product areas have seen customs duties double, things like vacuum cleaners and brooms and a whole range of things there. So you do have protectionism rising on both sides. India is a big market. I mean, it is our 9th largest goods trading partner to the United States. Still pales in comparison to the size of trade that we have with China, with Mexico, with Canada, but it's our 9th largest today. And if you think about where we're going to be in 20 years, it's only going up. So when you see a government for the first time in 25, 30 years that's putting up protectionist barriers, and we look at the upside about what trade could be in the future, a lot of American companies that see the market closing a little bit, they're going to start advocating. So will getting a few deals on trade and energy, and defense that the government controls, will that be enough to assuage and offset? It appears so. I think, as other speakers have mentioned, the fact that the trade rhetoric has been dialed down, even despite the fact that we probably won't get a deal, shows that the leaders are taking a long view this visit.
Is there a disappointment, Geeta, in government circles that we won't get this trade deal? When Prime Minister Modi went in September, October to the United States, there was this great expectation we'd clinch a deal. Didn't happen. He's coming to India in February. It now appears again there won't be a trade deal. Is India willing to be as patient and simply wait and tie up in other areas, continue with defense cooperation, strategic cooperation, and hope that eventually a re-elected President Trump will bring a trade deal on the table?
Well, Rajdeep, on the contrary, India is in an advantageous position when it comes to trade. So it is US that wants the trade deal happening. It is President Trump who wanted the trade deal to go through during his India visit. And it is not happening because India has put its foot down, saying that we are not going to compromise. We are okay with taking time, but a trade deal can come through later.
Are we losing out? You know, we haven't signed on to RCEP.
Absolutely.
We don't have a trade deal with the US. In a globalizing world, are we losing out?
We are losing out by not signing RCEP. That's a different issue altogether. But on the United States of America and the trade deal, I think sources in the government have told me that what is priority to them right now is to get back the GSP. The withdrawal of the GSP is something that they're really looking at very keenly and seeing if that is going to...
But from what I hear, Rajdeep, there was, as I was mentioning earlier from my sources, that India had met all these things. There was an agreement for a mini deal. Then the Americans pushed back on this. But I think the important point and to continue with Geeta's argument, line of thinking was, Trump had a one-trick pony when it came to trade. He said, I mean, right through, if you asked him what is his number one foreign policy issue, was trade, trade, trade. We, I think, in the last 3.5 years have successfully said, look, we are a strategic partner as well. Don't just look at us through the narrow prism of trade and try to put the kind of pressure that you're putting.
Right.
We have a whole lot of other advantages as a country that is there. Indo-Pacific is there. The defense relationship is strong. Energy is strong. Why are you just reducing to this? I think this visit is a recognition that of this broad spectrum of activity, relationship that we have, that is there, not restricted to purely
but
trade.
It's not just about,
and not transactional.
I'd just like to add, it's not just about tariffs. It's about the Harley-Davidsons. It's about dairy farm products.
So is it tactical or strategic shift?
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, we don't know.
We don't know.
Let's move on. Let me look at my third big question I want to pose. Is the Trump visit, in a sense, a political victory for Prime Minister Modi? Will Trump stay away, as many believe, from contentious issues like Kashmir and the Citizenship Amendment Act? Let's get a view from Washington. Fatima, what do you believe? Do you believe that President Trump will not raise an issue like Kashmir? Every time in the past, whenever we've met, he's invariably said, I'm more than happy to come out there and mediate.
I think I agree with you. I think we're going to expect a lot of talk about the strategic alignment, shared concerns, shared values. I think what this administration, the Trump administration, does so well is he's able to see each issue in a silo. So the strategic partnership is going to be something that's highlighted, the defense deals, the trade talks are not going to be talked about in his visit. And then we're not going to hear anything about the human rights issues in India. And so is this a win for Prime Minister Modi? I think it's expected. I think this is also not mentioned in how Modi and Trump still went out and appeared in Houston. This was following the revocation of Article 370. So I think this is just a continuation of some of the silences that we're hearing from this administration with regards to human rights in India.
Mr. Russo, do you believe, in a sense, that the US president wants to stay away from issues like Kashmir, from CA? He's not interested in anything to do with the contentious the contentious issues in India, unlike the US Congress, which from time to time does raise human rights concerns in Kashmir.
Yeah, I mean, we saw just a couple of months ago, we had this very important ministerial here in Washington, D.C., when your foreign minister and defense minister both came, signed a number of important defense agreements to strengthen our security cooperation. No mention of some of these contentious domestic political issues in India. So I suspect, by and large, you'd want to maintain the same prioritization. The long-term view of India as an economic and a security partner is so promising and so bursting with potential that it feels this administration is not going to try to risk that by raising, some of these contentious political issues. When the president gets back in the United States and gets back online and gets a microphone, might you see another reference to, a promise to intervene in Kashmir? Of course. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we've all faced in foreign policy from the United States right now. But I think while he's there, while he's on stage, he's going to remain on point, and he's going to focus on the long-term vision.
Casey, do you believe that the US president has this habit at times, the moment he gets a mic, to perhaps make the occasional off-the-cuff remark, maybe on contentious issues like Kashmir?
As was mentioned in another debate,
yes,
it generally happens in the presence of Imran Khan. So there's no danger of Imran Khan being here.
Yeah, so unless we fly Imran Khan down also to Ahmedabad, there's no danger of Kashmir being raised.
But I think that is basically not so, his interest is not so much in Kashmir. He thinks it's in the deal. You see, he's done a deal on North Korea, which hasn't worked. He's put a Palestinian deal on the table, which even King Hussein will not, King Abdullah will not back. So he wants to do a deal. His great thing is to get a Nobel Prize. You know, it rankles him sometimes.
You think President Trump wants a Nobel as well?
Oh, he's been saying, why did Obama get it? Why did this little girl?
Why did,
others get it? He keeps
reminding. Why did Malala get it and I didn't?
He keeps reminding the world about
Casey,
that.
to be fair on one point.
Yes.
When it came to the UN Security Council, China took it thrice to Kashmir. It is the US that blocked it. So he has put his money where his mouth was on this matter.
Different from saying, I will do a deal.
And Casey, let's also clarify. Every time he mentioned that I want to mediate in Kashmir, he would always say both sides agree. That was there. So it was not like he was pushing that point to there.
Absolutely correct.
Let's also look at
Can I just add, Rajdeep, there's a trick to it. Every time Donald Trump has spoken about Kashmir is only when he was asked, not out of his own volition. There are no questions in this press statement. When the press statement happens with Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi, they're not going to take questions, which is absolutely, it is unlike a US president to not be taking questions. So there are no questions.
There'll be no formal media interaction.
No unscripted statements.
There'll be no unscripted statements. But, there have been
tweets can't be controlled.
So do you believe in a sense that the US president is someone who wants to keep the contentious issues on the back burner at the moment? He wants to foreground the issues which he believes will put the US-India relationship, particularly given this president's concern on China, on a much stronger footing. That India is far more attractive as a partner to President Trump than Beijing would ever be. And to that extent, he doesn't want to say anything when he comes to India that will offend his Indian hosts. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure.
Or would you like to agree with that?
I would say that there is President Trump's view, and then there is the US establishment view.
What is the US establishment
view? And the
view?
US establishment view is exactly what you have said, that the potential of the strategic and economic partnership with India is so huge and, so promising that they don't want, specific issues on trade or other aspects to cloud it. Now, on Kashmir, I think it is President Trump's desire to somehow believe that he can resolve intractable issues, or he gets attracted to that. But each time he's made a statement, his establishment has clarified that this is not US policy. So there's a space, and I think for the Indian side, the effort has been to try to work with US institutions and institutionalize the relationship so that you can insulate it a bit from the vagaries of individual leadership.
Okay, good point. Yes.
It's a difficult task, of course, to work through institutions because Mr. Trump himself is the institution and he has his own set of advisors. So you're not very sure, since most of his senior secretaries have changed pretty rapidly.
We won't know who his secretary will be 6 months from now.
But I'll just make a quick point on the Kashmir issue. The administration is clear from what we can see. They're aligned to say that Kashmir is an internal issue. This is India's thing to handle. We are not going to get involved. We will take, defend wherever it's necessary to block China from doing anything serious against it. But if you see, there is a dichotomy that has grown in terms of the Congress.
Yes.
And certainly with the Democratic Party, where it is good for India to go out and answer correctly. What is the position on Kashmir? What is the position on NRC and CAA? These tricky issues need to be explained with the perspective that we are putting out, rather than wait for the Congress and have this kind of, some of the things that you're seeing in the papers this morning in terms of human rights and other issues. You need to deal with those issues.
Yes, Casey, you wanted to make
there's just a black swan lurking in the background. Tomorrow night, the ceasefire between Taliban and the government kicks in. And it has to run till the 29th, when the agreement becomes applicable if there's no major breach of ceasefire. So as President Trump comes here, that is in the background. Now, if there are any spoilers in that, something happens in Afghanistan, it can be a major distraction.
But let's be very clear. You know, this is a standalone visit.
Yeah.
And he's kept Pakistan out of the equation completely. To that extent,
Yeah,
you know, you could, you know, if Trump loses in November, the US president, shock victory, that's the last thing India really wants at this moment. A sort of strong human rights advocate like Bernie Sanders, who's probably going to talk Kashmir. But Mr. Russo, is that in a sense, given the fact that this visit is happening in a presidential year, do you see Mr. Trump playing safe in this last year of his presidency?
Playing safe? No. I don't think anything that he does any moment of any day is playing it safe by traditional standards. He's broken new ground in so many different ways, both good and bad. So the visit to India, you know, you talked about it earlier on the show, you know, the Indian demographic here in the United States, it's not big, but it's growing. It's relatively affluent. So, you know, there's a lot of reasons why the visit would make sense. My sense is, too, that the Indian government is not treating this like a lame duck visit. Not that they're expecting that he's necessarily going to win, but he's got a pretty good chance of it. So I haven't seen expectations, you know, for the visit really ratcheted down like you might expect if they thought the president had a less than even chance of winning re-election. So I think the president, he's treating this like he's got a full head of steam for another 4-year term coming up. I've seen India not reduce expectations because of that. So it doesn't feel like, you know, we're nearing the end of a presidency leading up to the visit.
Okay, so he isn't a lame duck president, at least not in his own mind by any chance, and he still remains in a sense a front runner to get re-elected. Let's turn to the next big question that we are raising on this round table. Is the Indo-US strategic alliance intact? Is there going to be a burgeoning Indo-Pacific axis to counter China's Asia-Pacific strength? Defense deals, are they top of the agenda? Raj Chengappa, you started off by saying you believe that this relationship now is in a sense embedded in a stronger strategic cooperation. And that's really what's going to be, in a sense, the big takeaway from the visit at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think by de-emphasizing trade and moving to these issues, take a look at, when you say strategic, it of course encompasses defense,
Sure.
Counter-terrorism, and other concerns, whether it's, you know, humanitarian assistance and everything else. There is a larger kind of perspective that we look at it. When you take defense, for instance, I think this has been the most promising link that India has had with the US ever since the US nuclear deal, Indo-US nuclear deal opened up relations. That didn't fare too well, but the defense sector has really taken off. And if you look at the way we have signed some of the foundation agreements, there's still one pending to do, and the fact that apart from the import of equipment, we are going to sign possibly in this, what is called an industry security annex, which is very critical for US companies to be collaborating with Indian companies in terms of defense production and everything else. So I think the Trump administration sees that as a huge, huge thing that is happening. India has close to $100 billion of equipment that it needs to buy in the next couple of years. India has said that a lot of the production has to be made in India itself or assembled in India. So in some senses, there is an alignment growing to ensure that component of it. Then if you take counterintelligence, you know, let's not forget that when it came to Masood Azhar, it was the US that pushed China in the Security Council to declare him a global terrorist. It was China that kept, you know, pushing it back under pressure from Pakistan. But at the end of it, the US said after 3 or 4 times, we are going to make a resolution in the UN Security Council. We don't agree. China was caught out in the sense it would be apparent that they were stalling the whole thing. They were forced into it. Of course, US was backed by both UK and France on this. So on both these sectors and intelligence sharing, I think that's going to be critical because we have convergence of interest on terrorism. That's very important also. And the final point I'd like to mention is on Indo-Pacific. You know, this is, I think, a major, major development that's happened because so far, Pacific for them was, you know, what they meant Hollywood and this side of Brazil and everything else. Hollywood to Bollywood was the next sort of definition of Indo-Pacific. But now it's moved to the African shores, the Western African shores. So what India is doing is in some senses expanding what it was confined to the Indian Ocean as a larger thing. And the larger message is that India and the US, and let's not forget Australia and Japan, which has come together in what is called the Quad arrangement, is finally, they won't say it so loud, but this is a move to contain China, build an alternative narrative.
Do you believe that that's a big goal to contain China? Do you believe that has been, in a way, a centerpiece of what President Trump would ideally like to do? India fits in perfectly with arrangements like Quad. into that growing desire to contain China in the region?
I would say that both countries have a convergent interest in terms of balancing China in Asia. How do you prevent Chinese overwhelming dominance in Asia? And the US is the only balancer because they have an active presence and influence in Asia. Europe doesn't. Russia, in any case, has moved closer to China because of the pressure which the West has exerted on Russia through sanctions after Ukraine. So when we look at potential balancers in Asia, then the US is the one country capable of fulfilling that role, though they are at the moment, you know, wavering between withdrawal and continuing engagement, and they are looking for regional partners for burden sharing. Now, that is the question which perhaps we will have to discuss with the US when we talk of Indo-Pacific. What is the kind of burden sharing that India may be prepared to? And we should be very frank about where we think our interests lie and what our capabilities are.
Let me take that to Casey on the other side of the table. Do you believe that there is this growing convergence of interests, given the world or the US certainly looking at China as primarily the country they would like to contain in the region?
Look, two US presidents developed that. That's why we got the nuclear deal. Nuclear deal was not about the deal. It was about unshackling India and take you out of the technology denial regimes, 4 of them. So that was only a small part of it. Obama, after some little hesitation in the beginning, pushed it. And that's why when he came here, there was a separate document, a vision statement on where they want it. But Trump has gone back on that. You see, whether it is Europe, they don't know exactly what is his plan. His friendliness with Putin. And then again, he's had a temporary deal with China. Now, you thought he was going to fight with China, but he's given them a temporary commercial deal. So, he is so tactical in dealing with them. And US have just been kicked out of Philippines, where they're not going to have access to the port any longer.
Is it tactical or just pragmatic? What works at that particular moment for President Trump becomes US foreign policy?
No,
there's no long-term vision.
No, there are two conflicting motives. One is to do the least and withdraw, which is to be, really not having major military presence abroad. Second is, as she said, burden sharing. Now, what exactly does it imply? We don't know. But we, on the contrary, being in the region, if they are leaving Afghanistan, we need Iran. We need Russia. So we have to also look at those two. You may be buying weapons from them, but the Indian approach traditionally from 1991 or even earlier has been, you balance, don't put all the eggs in one basket. You'll have American weapons, you want the Russians on board, you don't want the Russian, Chinese combined to really work against your interests. So we are in a difficult thing where you don't know where President Trump stands, and yet you have balancing to do.
Very quickly, Fatima Salman, do you believe that containing China is a priority for President Trump?
I do. I think that this is a historic moment for Donald Trump coming to India in his first presidential kind of trip to India. It symbolizes how much importance he puts on India as a counterweight to China. So I definitely agree with you. I think it's definitely a priority for this administration.
Let's then come to the next and my final big question. People-to-people contact. Is that the real basis for sustained Indo-US ties? Will President Trump relent on H-1B visas? Just some of the questions I want to raise. There's a sense, though, that at the end of the day, this entire visit is being propelled, and we started off with this, by the diaspora, by this growing realization by the two countries that the estranged democracies have really much in common today. Is there a sense, Geeta, that that is what is going to be the driver, irrespective of what happens on trade? At the end of the day, just the sheer size of the Indian community now and their growing influence in America is a driver.
Well, in the previous administrations here in India, Rajdeep, we didn't see them use the Indian diaspora as well. So yes, they have become an important component, bringing them to the limelight.
Particularly with Prime Minister Modi, and he's sort of connect with the Indian NRI community in the US.
And he's shown that way to President Trump as well, showing them that this is a diaspora that you might want to garner the votes. You might want to ensure that they're on your side too. So yes, it is a very important aspect in not just foreign policy, but each other's domestic policies today.
You know, Meera Shankar, you were ambassador in the US. Did you get that sense that over the last 10, 15 years, this is what has been the real pivot that has changed this relationship? For much too long, we were these estranged democracies, almost hostile. The Cold War years, the relationship went through its ups and downs. But now it's stabilized simply because of people-to-people contact.
I would kind of put it slightly differently. I would say that the end of the Cold War and the opening up of the Indian economy were the two pivotal factors for a reassessment in the relationship and establishing it on a new basis. The Indian-American...
For which we need to give a lot of credit to Prime Minister Rao in the 1990s, then Prime Minister Vajpayee, and then Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh.
It's been a continuous process, both on the Indian side and on the US side. And the Indian-American community played the role of a bridge in this process, but there were very strong geopolitical and geo-economic interests that changed, that propelled the relationship and created the conditions for it to move forward.
But at the end of the day, we have serious concerns when it comes to, for example, H-1B visas. You know, we continue to believe that the American administration is less than fair to India.
No, and that is something we need to take up with President Trump when he comes. There are two concerns that are there. One, the H-1B visa and the restrictions. So far, it's not impacted us. We still account for 70% of the total H-1B visas. That is, Indians are there. There are about 130,000 Indians that apply every, get the visa. The other concern is the H-4, which is, the spouse being allowed to stay on. That's spouse visa that's there. But I think just adding to what Meera said, I mean, this is something we need to take up. If you look, it's not only one, what did 1991 do? It got us an economy that began to grow at 8 to 10%. It gave us the economic heft, the clout. That's what then opened up the markets. The other thing, which is very critical, and that's right when she says the continuum, is when K.C. Singh Saab was mentioning about the Indo-US nuclear deal. That was a boulder in the living room. Till it got shifted out, that opened out whole new vistas that were there. And if you look, actually, we are in somewhat of an advantageous position when it comes to the diaspora. Apart from the support they're giving, we have sent some of our best there. And if even Mr. Trump begins to make the marking system, we will still send some of our, we will not be impacted
very quickly, 30 seconds.
Sorry,
yes.
Just on the H-1B, though the Indians are the largest number who get it, it's the US companies, it's Google, Amazon and others who are getting first pick. The Indian companies are having increasing difficulty in getting their requests processed.
Point taken, yes, okay. Casey.
2 points. Firstly, we must make a distinction. The diaspora may not have an interest in all your issues.
Yes.
They have no interest in H-1B. So that's why you find no protest there, nobody going to White House, putting up placards. There's no interest to them. That's a fight you have to fight on your own. Now, that you have to explain to President Trump that it is helping US economy, but this is one of his core things. Trade balancing and jobs is what he got elected. In an election year, he's not going to give you anything on that.
Let me ask you,
very clear.
Let me ask you, Geeta, in conclusion, as you track this visit, is there something you're most looking forward to? We are now told Ivanka Trump is going to come. We are told Melania Trump is going to go and visit a government school in Delhi. Is there something that you're looking forward to in all the tamasha that's going to take place?
Well, two important things. One, Melania Trump going to an Aam Aadmi Party-led Delhi government school is going to be certainly an eyesore for the central government, whether if they like it or not, whether if they say it or not.
No, whose idea was that? Whose idea was that? Whose idea was that?
No,
whose idea was it?
The US Embassy.
The US Embassy is taking
it. Kejriwal met Amit Shah the other day.
Yeah, but that's interesting. But having said that, it's not something that would entirely please the government of the day.
Government. Okay. There was a grand plan. It has been cut short and cut down to certain minimal things that the Delhi government can do. And finally, Trump's interaction with the US pool at the US Embassy is going to be very important. We'll see what questions are asked there, because there's certainly no questions that we'd be able to ask Trump
Okay.
or
At the end of the day, Trump Bhai has said he likes Narendra Bhai. He may not like India, he said, or he's not happy with India. Is that the words? Yeah. I'm not happy with India, but
India's been unfair.
India has been unfair, but I like Narendra Bhai. And maybe that personal chemistry, we'll have to see whether hug-lop-mercy works like diplomacy does. At the end of the day, it's going to be a fascinating couple of days to watch these two big countries deal with each other through rather individualistic leaders, both populist strongmen. Trump and Modi have more in common than you might imagine. Thank you all very much for joining us on this special roundtable. Fatima there in Washington. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.